looking at this video by Chuck from Strong Towns talking about new urbanism and and celebration in particular, and why um, why it may not age well. I think if I play this video on the screen, that the audio is not going to come out, so I'm not even going to bother with it. But let's see. There we go. All right. Hopefully the screen is still recording. But so some things to remember about celebration when we're talking about new urbanism and why this is really not a great example. So you can see here's celebration, all this stuff here on the other side of 417 here, and then this is Disney. I mean, it's basically all Disney, but in terms of actual parks, the Wide World of Sports Complex, you've got the Animation Resort, Pop Century, um, Hollywood Studios, Epcot is up here, Animal Kingdom's over here. You've got this is Disney Springs. I mean, this is enormous. This is 49 square miles is what they have. It's the size of San Francisco. It's pretty crazy. They used to have more, and Celebration was really started as an idea at Disney's. So Epcot was the experimental prototype community of tomorrow, and it wasn't just supposed to be what Epcot is today. Like, people were actually supposed to live there, and they followed through on that idea. I don't know if it's exactly what Disney's idea was, but that's essentially what Celebration is. So, in, in that context, it's important to remember that Celebration was not built to fit into Greater Orlando or fit into the community. It was made to fit into Disney, and that's really what it does. Except that I think they pretty quickly realized that, oh crap, like, people are going to live here and then they can vote, and we won't have a company town anymore, basically, which is what the Reedy Creek Improvement District has been and functionally still is. So we want to look real quick. So here are the old boundaries. It's not called Reedy Creek Improvement District anymore. That whole thing with between Disney and DeSantis is now called the Central Florida Tourism Oversight Board or something like that. But it's crazy that it is always operated not really like its own city, but almost like its own county, because it has multiple cities within it. So this one is Lake Buena Vista in green here, and this is mostly just resorts. There's a few houses. I think there are maybe like 45 or 50 people who live there permanently, and then in this peach color, this is Bay Lake, and that's entirely parks, like what we were just looking at with Epcot and Magic Kingdom, and all that other stuff. And then in pink, this is hilarious. This is unincorporated Reedy Creek. So and this is actually like a solar farm that they have out there. I have the map up. Yeah, so this unincorporated area is up here, and you can see all of the PV arrays. It's massive. When you drive past here on the highway on 429 here, it's probably like 2 miles long, and you can see all these like sandy rectangle things. They all have a circle in the middle. These are called ribs or rapid infiltration basins. So basically, this is the aquifer recharge area. So they send treated sewage back to these, and these things are giant sprinklers, these little round things in the middle, and they basically just spray treated effluent in these sandy pits, and it goes back into the aquifer. There's a ton of them out here. You can also see all the wetlands around it. Um, these are all these creeks here are basically the headwaters. This giant swamp is the headwaters of the Kissimmee River, which is the main source of Lake Okeechobee. Like all of this water, these are the headwaters. It all flows down into Lake Okeechobee and then into the Everglades. So essentially, all the water in the Everglades, it's coming from here. And so if we zoom in here on Celebration, you'll start seeing on the map Orange Grove Island, Salt Lake Island, Long Island, Cane Island. And these are basically just like upland areas in the wetlands. They could be like, the elevation around here is generally like somewhere between 65 and 85 feet above sea level. And that would be like the surface of the wetlands. So these upland areas would be, 10 feet higher than that generally. But that's what Celebration is. It's just a collection of these islands that they built on, which is why you're not going to get the type of dense sort of urbanity that you would in other places. So when you couple that with the fact that this was built by Disney for Disney, you kind of get a better understanding of what's going on. And I also feel like this is pretty early on. This is like going on almost 30 years old at this point. And they took almost all of their cues from Seaside. Like when you instead of having the ocean here, you've got this lake, which is man-made. It's a stormwater pond basically. But if you drop down in here, you can see what they were going for, and there's a lot of like the architecture's not identical, and the color palettes are different, but that's where this is coming from. And it's interesting, we'll see later that this actually gets copied quite a bit around here. But yeah, this map was funny. Found this on Reddit. This is comparing the size of Reedy Creek, which is all the property basically owned by Disney, to the Disneyland in California, which is just this blue little square. So absolutely massive place. But going back to Celebration for a second, just for context. So, keep that into consideration. Like, it's a suburb. It's a bunch of islands in a swamp that Disney put together to build this like sort of prototype community for themselves. And I guess a key other point here is that Celebration is not its own city. It's unincorporated Osceola County. So all of the planning and zoning stuff, that all goes through the county. There have been times recently where they've tried to organize and incorporate as their own city, but once they realized how expensive it was going to be, they just gave up, I guess. I don't know. It would make life a lot easier for all of the planners in Osceola County, because everything in Celebration is it's a PD. It's all done by PD. So every time they want to change something, they have to come to the county to amend the PD, basically. It's a huge pain. Like, even so much as a lamppost, if they want to change it, they basically have to amend the PD. And I've explained this in my Get Rid of Zoning video, that a PD is just basically like a zoning code that is unique to that place. And it's an agreement between that community and the county or the city or whoever approved the PD for what can be done there. The whole, the PD can spell out a whole lot of details, like what park benches, like what street furniture can look like, what lampposts can look like, how wide your driveways can be. Like, you can really get into the details there, or it can be super light and just explain your density program, basically, like how many units you're going to have at full build out. And it doesn't mean that you can't change it. Like it, you can amend anything. This is done by local ordinance. So whatever board approved it is the same board that can change it or remove it. And at any point, the celebration can get rid of the PD entirely. You know, I used to work in Osceola County, and it was pretty common to get rid of PDs because the PDs were more restrictive than what the current future land use and zoning allow for. Like a lot of times the PD would, like the density cap was just much lower with the PD, and if they got rid of the PD, then they would have much higher. They would be allowed much higher densities with the county's future land use and zoning. So looking at this map here, you can see in purple it's celebration, and then all around here in this other color, and the green is ag, but what it's really showing are preserved wetlands. And this other color, I don't know what you call that, but going around, that's all what Disney still owns. And you can see like how they gerrymandered out celebration, so no one would be able to vote in Reedy Creek. But this darker yellow, orangey color that's all throughout the county here, this is what's called tourist commercial, and these look like your typical suburban subdivisions, and you know, for all intents and purposes, they are, but they're strictly set aside for short-term rental. So you can live there if you want to. I don't know how much fun that would be because you're basically like living in a neighborhood full of Airbnbs, but like everyone around here understands like, hey, let me go back to the map here. Everybody understands that basically all of this stuff from Sand Lake Road, well, actually more accurately like Conroy up here, all the way down in this corridor, and all the way down I-4 and across the county line down to Celebration. There's a big exit here for Champions Gate. I think that's right here. So basically all of that, just everyone understands that that's for the tourists. And I think everyone here appreciates that because if you live here and you want to experience that, you can drive to it and experience it. But the rest of the time, you don't interact with tourists at all. It's kind of nice, and it's actually kind of wild because when you're downtown, like if you're driving on 408 and you're getting onto I-4 South, there's this really really big interchange ramp, and it's like the city has two skylines. There's like the skyline for Orlando, and then there's the skyline for the theme parks, which is, you know, mostly hotels, but it's like they're two distinct cities, and that's fine. It works for everybody, but you know, it's funny because like you hear about people in like Barcelona getting really stressed out about tourism. Like we had 74 million tourists. This is like the most visited place in the U.S. Like a lot of numbers that you hear will just be this international visitors number that they'll quote, and like for L.A. or New York or whatever, and they won't quote the domestic number. But like the level, on average, every day there are 320,000 people here who don't live here. That's like 11% of the regional population, right? It's insane. But when you live here, you don't experience that. Like it doesn't. You unless you work in tourism, you don't interact with it unless you want to, because it's in a separate part of the city, and it's not in the city really. It's in a separate part of the county, and it's its own thing. But the reason that I bring all of that up, going back to the zoning map real quick, is that so all those other things I said about celebration are still true, but also it's surrounded by this tourist commercial, right? It's in the heart of the tourism district. So housing is naturally going to be expensive there because you're competing with tourists who are going to spend more money on a vacation. Like, you know, my family, my parents and I, we chip in and rent a beach house in the summer sometimes, and that might be something like $2,000 for the week, but I couldn't afford to pay that weekly for my own house. Like, I'll do it once a year for vacation, and only when I'm going in with other people to do it. But you can't compete with people's vacation money for your life. But that's why celebration is so expensive, because of where it is. And it was never going to be anything other than that. So that doesn't mean that, like, I'm not trying to say that new urbanism isn't generally more expensive, but I think that's because there's such a high demand for that product type or that kind of community, and there's such small supply of it. So when it does get built, everybody's champing at the bit to get a piece of it. But anyway, my point there is basically that, like, there are a lot of reasons that celebration is what it is, and why it's not a great example of new urbanism to me. I mean, like, design wise, sure, yeah, it's great. It's a nice place to walk around. The bike trails are great. They even have boardwalks through the swamps here. So that's it is a nice place to live if you work down there, but I wouldn't live there if I didn't work, like, within a couple of miles of there. And the other part about that, and this is honestly, like, Disney, it's kind of crazy because Disney has an enormous transportation system. Like, their internal transit to Disney is like the envy of cities everywhere. I mean, they've got gondolas, they have ferries, they have a monorail, they have BRT. They built their own busways, and they've got articulated buses running up and down them like every 5 minutes. It's nuts. But they don't want a lot of transit access from other places. Like, every public bus that goes to Disney only goes to Disney Springs, and there's a little transfer center. And I've done it a couple times. Super easy. The bus leaves Disney Springs, it gets on I-4, it goes up the express lanes, and it goes all the way to downtown, right to the bus terminal. No stops in between. So it's like there's no excuse to drive if you live near downtown Orlando to get down there. But anyway, that's that. One other interesting thing I wanted to bring up about celebration and, like, why it can't really be bigger. This is the DEP website, and there's in Florida, because flooding because we get, like, a shit ton of rain in the summertime. Like, it can rain 2 inches an hour pretty regularly. And I'm not saying, like, it'll rain for an hour and we'll get 2 inches, but maybe it'll rain for an hour and we'll get an inch. Or sorry, it'll rain for a half hour and we'll get an inch of rain. Like, that's not uncommon. So you have to deal with these, like, really heavy events that happen very often. And then on top of that, we can get tropical storms where, with Hurricane Ian just a couple of years ago, we got 18 inches of rain in, like, 36 hours. Totally nuts. It's the only time, I don't need to go in, but it's the only time that I was ever really concerned about flooding near me. Like, there was no flooding in my neighborhood, but there were places like a mile or two from here where I was concerned that, like, maybe the roads would be impassable, that kind of thing. But anyway, there's a lot of concern about flooding and stormwater and all that kind of stuff. So there's basically, like, this system, like a transfer of development rights when you impact wetlands. There's different classifications of wetlands. Not really an expert on this, but I do deal with it quite a bit at work. But on this map, you can see kind of this dashed line is the mitigation bank service area, and then in yellow is the mitigation bank itself. So like, and there are multiple banks within the mitigation bank service area. So any wetland impacts that happen would have to be mitigated by buying rights within this bank. I think I got that right, but don't quote me on it. But it's basically it's basically the gist of it. Like if you're impacting wetlands, then you have to pay for mitigation elsewhere. And that's why celebration can't really be any bigger than it is, because it's not just like the wetlands impacts in celebration itself, it's the wetland impacts like for the entire Disney property. So all of those wetlands that they impact had to be mitigated. And you can see, I'll try to zoom out a little bit. I don't know if you can still see it there. Yeah, you can see these big yellow lines. So this is essentially like all mitigation banks for Disney. So pretty nuts, but yeah, huge wetlands complexes that are preserved there, and they really can't. Aside from these little islands that they had the rights to originally, they can't impact outside of that. So you were never going to wind up with a sort of compact small city there. It's just not possible. I think the other part about celebration itself, and then we'll move on, is the distance from the center of the region. Like you're pretty much on the outskirts here. This is downtown Orlando. It's a solid 20 miles by car, and you're not. If you're doing that commute every day, that sucks. And not a lot of people who work in downtown Orlando, but there are enough, and not just like right here, but around. Total employment in this whole corridor between the two hospitals is probably 250, 300,000, something like that. So I think Baldwin Park is a much better example of new urbanism in not just in the Orlando area, but in general. And I'm not by any means encouraging people to come here instead of celebration. Like if you're coming to visit and you want to stay in a sort of tourist zone, go for it. But if you want to get out and explore, I think that Baldwin Park is a much better example. And this used to be the Naval Training Center, and it was actually kind of like this whole area, Orlando Executive Airport, and Baldwin Park were all part of originally the Air Force, but then the Air Force moved down to MCO. It was McCoy Air Force Base. That's why the initials are MCO. And this airport was way too small to land bigger jets anyway. And by the 60s, the Air Force was running B-52s, and you just couldn't accommodate them at this tiny airport, which is how we wound up with this behemoth of an airport with like 2-mile-long runways. It's massive, but we would not have had that without the Air Force, and this was already there, which is kind of why Disney picked the place that he picked to build the parks. It wasn't like Orlando was already here. There were already industries here. Orlando was already bigger at that point than Jacksonville was. And it's, and Tampa was also bigger. I mean, Tampa had kind of always been a bigger city than Orlando or Jacksonville, but both Jacksonville and Tampa grew at really similar rates to Orlando, just maybe in different decades. So it's not really like Orlando wouldn't be this size without Disney. It's more like Disney and the theme parks remade a big part of the Orlando economy in their own image. Like, they kind of captured that growth and made it their own, which is a bummer for, like half of the metro area. It's kind of like, in some ways, it's kind of like Charlotte with like Las Vegas stapled to the side of it. That's I think that's the best way that I can describe it, really. But anyway, back to Baldwin Park. I mean, you can see how much more dense this is. Like all of these neighborhoods here were built in the 50s, and and this was really the edge of the city on Bennett Road here. This was the Naval Training Center, and um, the Navy had been making plans to close it for a while, and then they finally did. And within I think 2 years, construction started. There's a lot of demo that happened, and this place is not perfect. There are a lot of things that really bother me about it, especially because I'm here often. I live near it, and so Corinne Drive here used to keep going straight, not all the way through, but it went straight into the heart of what the Navy base was, and they completely redirected it. Instead of running Corinne Drive out here to connect to 436 so that you could have bus service run into the heart of your community, it doesn't. The bus goes up Bennett, and it takes a left on Corinne, and then it goes up General Reese, and then it takes a right on Glen Ridge. So it basically skirts the community. It doesn't go through it. And because they made all of the streets narrow to slow traffic down, and they made kind of this rat's maze of streets to get people to not use it as a thoroughfare and to walk more. That's great. You can walk, but it also means that even though you're 3 miles from downtown Orlando, that the transit service actually sucks. Unless you live right on the edge of Baldwin, you don't get great transit. And I mean, the transit kind of sucks anyway because there's 2 routes that run down General Reese. So if you live on General Reese or just right off of it, you get 2 buses an hour. But if you don't, you get 1 bus an hour because the 6 bus takes a right on Corinne and then goes down Bumby, and the 13 takes a left on Corinne and goes down Bennett. But yeah, you can just see how much more dense it is. And the crazy thing is not only is it more dense, but the houses are bigger. Most of the houses here are from the 50s, all this mid-century stuff. These are all 900 to 1,600 square feet. They're not big. Some of them, people have put additions on some of them, but you're still only talking 1,800 to 2,000 square feet. They're not huge houses. For the most part, they're on quarter-acre lots or a little bit less. But when you go around the corner here to the edge of Baldwin Park, all of these houses are 3,000 square feet, basically, on long, skinny lots. And I mean, it helps that they're all 2 stories in terms of square footage, but is this house really blurred out? It always, whenever I see a house that's blurred out like that, I always just assume that person's in witness protection. It's such a stupid thing to draw attention to yourself. Anyway, but yeah, I don't think that they did a great job with the streets here, and they definitely did not do a good job planning for future transit access in any way, shape, or form. But it's also worth noting too that this place, like so many other retail corridors, got really beat up during COVID. A lot of these places have turned over, but it's still so functional. You go down here on a weeknight and it's just kids in going to, there's a tutoring spot back here. It's kids going to tutoring, kids going to karate. There's a dance studio across the street. There's this little gymnastics place right here. It really is the center of the community, and there is nowhere in Baldwin Park that's more than a mile from here. And the wild thing is, there are a ton of apartments here, right here on the main street, but in the back of this little courtyard, that's the Publix liquor store. And if you go through here, this is actually pretty cool that this works. Publix, full service supermarket. And this is basically this is it for parking. There are 2 garages that are tucked behind some of the buildings, but if you're driving here, if you can't find a space on street, it's here or nothing. And so, I think people drive to this Publix generally from outside of the neighborhood, but if you're standing here, if you're like in this courtyard, sitting on one of the benches, you will just see like a steady stream of people walking with grocery bags. It's super common, and it really is like the center of the community. Um, but I think that yeah, and like just in terms of apartment density, something that you don't see in Celebration um, are just these big apartment buildings. And granted, you know these are 4 stories, but there are a bunch of them, and this isn't this isn't downtown. This is, you know, by the time you get here to the side of the lake, you're about 4 miles from downtown. You know, on paper, densities wind up looking a little bit lower because of how much open space they wound up incorporating in the community. And like this is a full trail all the way around the lake. It's I don't know. I think it's like it's a mile and a half loop or something like that. I could be getting that wrong, but just if you go out there any evening, like um, it's just people cycling, jogging, rollerblading, whatever, walking their dogs. Um, it's definitely a scene, and it's actually my dog. One of her favorite places to hang out is right here. Um, but anyway, I guess about Baldwin too. You've got your K-5 right here, the Baldwin Park Elementary School. There's a daycare right across the street from it. In case you've got kids who are in school and kids who aren't old enough for school yet. And then you've got Glenridge Middle School, also in Baldwin Park. So, you know, your kids are a little bit older, but they still don't have to leave the neighborhood to go to school, and, you know, totally bikeable and walkable. And all of these schools around here, there's Winter Park High, Glenridge Middle, Baldwin Park Elementary. This is Audubon Park K-8. All of these schools have like 50-60% of their students walking or biking to school. And those are pretty high numbers for the suburbs. And, you know, I know this is close to downtown Orlando, but it's still pretty suburban. So anyway, getting to Chuck's big criticism of new urbanism, housing going to age, right? I think the answer is right here. This is under construction. These are new apartments under construction, and they were just approved like in the last year. I think I rode by there. I want to say like 2 weeks ago, and it looked like they were getting pretty close to being finished. I guess the satellite imagery is a couple of months old. That's how it's going to age, right? Like if you want to change the PD, then you can change the PD, and that's what Baldwin Park is. Just like with Celebration, it's a plan development. It's a document. It's a living document. If times change, tastes change, they want to add something. It's usually not a problem unless it's going to cause some kind of infrastructure problem for the broader community. But yeah, new development is still happening here, and this lot has been empty forever. And there have been various proposals, but no one's really moved forward with it. And I'm not sure exactly why, because I think maybe, 20 years ago when they were planning this out, this was meant to be, this is all office space here. And that's what this site was meant to be office space, but there's no market for that anymore. And a lot of, everyone who comes to look at it is looking at residential. And because the neighborhood is really underparked to begin with, like, it would be great if there was transit here and people didn't have to be so dependent on a car to get to other places in the city. But if anything sucks about Baldwin Park, it's that the transit access is not great, and basically never will be, because you're going to have, to get buses in here, you're going to have custom made buses. Like the corners are too tight. You're basically going to need to run articulated buses down here, I would imagine, to get around some of these corners, or just shorter buses maybe. But in any case, because this is so underparked, anyone who wanted to build residential here would need to build some kind of podium, probably. And I'm guessing that that is making it prohibitively expensive, and that's why it remains vacant, even though this is a super valuable piece of land. And like, if I don't know, I like where I live, but I wouldn't mind living here on that corner. So I don't know, like I wouldn't hand wring too much about it, because this stuff isn't going to age any better or worse than any other place built with the same kind of housing and the same kind of materials. Like it's gonna be the same. And if some of the best neighborhoods in some of our best cities are the historic neighborhoods where not a lot of the original fabric has been destroyed. And I'm not saying that we should. I'm not saying our neighborhoods need to be like a museum piece. Obviously, neighborhoods evolve over time, but I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if this place evolves slowly. And I don't think that's impossible either. And I mean, you can see like these great, like this whole street here, it was set up to be live workspaces, to have like a professional office on the ground floor, like an accountant or an attorney or something like that. And then if you go around the corner here, there's like a whole different there's a whole different style of live work. Like you can see here, there's a personal trainer on the ground floor. And sometimes some of these are offices upstairs, but some of them are apartments upstairs. So the space is really flexible. And if you watch my next video, my part 3 on exclusionary zoning, that's basically the gist of it, right? That like what we need are flexible spaces, like flexible buildings. What it's really silly to center your zoning around a use, right? But it's also silly to center your zoning around a specific product type. Like these are townhomes here, but they could easily be converted into multiple apartments. So why not? Like we have way too many 4 and 5 bedroom houses. Let's chop them up into 1 and 2 bedroom apartments and studios. That's way cheaper than building new stuff. We don't, when you look at the numbers and how distorted the ratios are between the availability of studio and 1 bedroom apartments and the oversupply of 4 and 5 bedroom houses, we don't actually need to build anything new. We just need to take a whole bunch of 4 and 5 bedroom houses and turn those 5 bedroom houses into 5 1 bedroom apartments, essentially. And there's no reason that this giant 3,300 square foot house can't be 5 600 square foot apartments. Like they're yeah. Anyway, I would not. This is the last thing that I would be concerned about, like not aging well. I think it's going to age way better than just suburbia in general. And on top of that, I think if we're looking to fix something with the urbanist communities, it should really be the transit accessibility. Like all of these should be TODs. A lot of these, like with Baldwin and with Celebration and with Seaside, they were like proof of concept, right? The concept is done. Like everybody knows that it works now. We need to be moving on to next steps, and we're improving on that. And there's nothing wrong with the previous version either. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. I'm Jim. This is Urban Legends. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.